Meeting will come to order. Normally, we don't start without Senator Durbin being here, but he's busy in another committee and will come along later. I have his permission to move ahead. So thank you all for coming. Today's hearing will highlight the challenges faced by state and local law enforcement when they encounter drones that pose threats to their own public safety. In 2018, most of us serving on this committee, including this senator and ranking member Durbin, voted to grant advanced counter unmanned aircraft system authority to the Departments of Justice and Homeland Security for public safety functions. These authorities have been extended temporarily 8 times since they were originally signed into law in 2018, which is a testament to their importance. The counter-drone authorities granted to Department of Justice and Department of Homeland Security in 2018 left state and local law enforcement out of this framework, but the threats that local law enforcement faces are very much the same. As the threat of dangerous drone use continues to expand and evolve, Congress must find a way to equip law enforcement with the vital tools while serving civil liberties. These principles are not incompatible. Notably, the drone industry itself has been asking for clear rules and responsibly deployed counter-drone authorities by state and local law enforcement for several years now. Safer skies are better for everyone, including even amateur drone hobbyists. Over the years, Congress has heard a lot from federal government on this issue, but today we're going to hear from our state law enforcement officials telling us their part of the story. The law enforcement professionals here today have unique perspectives on some of the most pressing challenges when it comes to criminal use of drones. These include correctional facilities where organized crime groups bombard prisons with contraband like dangerous weapons, drugs, cell phones, and tools to aid escape. Illegal drone incursions force prisons around the country to lock down at the expense of those who seek rehabilitation, education, and other programming while serving their sentences. Drones are also a massive threat at our southern border, where cartels use them to conduct surveillance of U.S. law enforcement, to smuggle dangerous drugs into our communities, and as weapons of war. We can't wait until a creative criminal or terrorist succeeds in mass casualty attacks before Congress acts. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and federal law enforcement can't be everywhere all at once. But expanded law enforcement authorities must come to oversight and accountability. Our witnesses today will tell you and our committee that they're not afraid of oversight or accountability. They're already taking oaths to defend the Constitution as well as their committees. I will play a 1-minute video displaying some of the creative and disturbing ways that criminals use drones. As it currently stands, there's very little our state and local law enforcement professionals can do about them, and that needs to change, and that's why we are having this hearing. Would you start the television.
Drug cartels are now using drones.
Smuggle drugs and other contraband inside multiple Georgia state prisons.
U.S. law enforcement officials could not immediately quantify the number of drones, type, or amount of drugs encountered.
The cartels authorized the use of weaponized drones, explosives against CBP personnel and U.S. law enforcement down there at the southern border. And you can quite literally see a bomb drop from this drone and actually make contact down there.
In recent years, drones have become a popular method of dropping contraband into prisons.
They've seen drones operated by Mexican drug cartels that are observing U.S. military personnel along the border.
They can move 5 to 10 kilos of drugs across the border. So they are warning now that they might be using these weaponized drones against U.S. personnel on this side. So definitely cause for concern there.
What should I do? So don't introduce them.
No, go ahead. You'll introduce our witnesses and then
Okay. Now, if Senator Durbin wants to give his opening statement when he gets here, I'll call on him at that time. And he was going to introduce his witness. I'm going to do that for him. Is that right? Correct. Yeah. Okay. Our first witness is Captain Troy Wilson. Captain Wilson joined the Texas Department of Public Safety in 1993. Captain Wilson is the Texas Ranger Division Unmanned Aircraft System Program Coordinator. Currently, the Texas Department of Public Safety has approximately 402 UAS aircraft and 384 pilots. The Ranger Division that Captain Wilson coordinates has approximately 67 UAS pilots and 108 U.S. aircraft. Captain Wilson is uniquely qualified to discuss the growing drone threat along the border. Next is Senator Sergeant Robert Douly. Sergeant Douly is statewide UAS counter UAS coordinator with Florida Highway Patrol. Sergeant Douly has more than 23 years of service as a Florida State Trooper and has developed and led the Florida Highway Patrol's UAS program since its inception. Sergeant Douly has a broad range of experience that includes working with other partner agencies at the local, state, interstate, and federal levels, as well as lawmakers, state attorneys, and other community stakeholders. Finally, we have President Ricky Dixon. Mr. Dixon serves as Secretary of Florida's Department of Corrections and is also currently serving as president of the American Correctional Association. Mr. Dixon began his career in corrections in 1996. Throughout his early career, Dixon served as correctional officer, colonel of the Florida State Prison, assistant warden, and warden at 3 separate correctional institutions. In 2021, Mr. Dixon was appointed to be Secretary of the Florida Department of Corrections. He is widely recognized as a correctional subject matter. Okay. Introduction of minority witnesses. I'd first like to welcome Jennifer Daskal. Ms. Daskal is partner with Venable Cybersecurity Team. She recently served during the Biden administration as Deputy Homeland Security Advisor, Principal Deputy Legal Advisor to the National Security Council, and Acting General Counsel for the Department of Homeland Security. I also welcome Laura Donohue, Professor of Law, Georgetown University Law Center, and Faculty Director of Georgetown Center of National Security and the Law. She is a recognized expert in national security and privacy technology and constitutional law as experts on drone. Now I would like to do what we customarily do, swear the team, so would you please rise? And I'd like to administer this oath. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. I've seen a positive response from all of you. Thank you very much. Now we'll go my left to my right, so we'll start with Mr. Wilson, Captain Wilson.
Good morning. Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Durbin, thank you for inviting me to testify before you today. As you know, my name is Troy Wilson, and I'm a staff captain with the Texas Rangers with the Department of Public Safety. My responsibilities also include overseeing drone operations within the Texas Ranger Division. Texas Ranger Division has been operating UAS on the Texas-Mexico border since 2019. Currently, each week, we are sending 4 Special Operations Group ground teams to the border. Each team is supported by a 2-man UAS team. We have operated along the border from El Paso to Brownsville, and these teams work very closely with U.S. Border Patrol in air marine operations. When we started this in 2019, there was very little UAS used by the criminal organizations, but their ground counter surveillance was substantial. Currently, they still maintain their ground counter surveillance, but have augmented it with UAS surveillance of law enforcement personnel at all levels. In the past, we have had attempts by criminal U.S. operators trying to crash their drones into our drones. We've had their drones hovering above our helicopters. Our helicopters would be at about 1,100 feet, and the drone would be above that, just watching. We have seen it used to surveil where law enforcement is and is not on the border. And most recently, about a month ago, one of our drones was mitigated by a cartel across in Laredo, Nuevo Laredo. Transnational criminal organizations use unmanned aircraft along the Texas-Mexico border presents a significant evolving threat. These organizations are increasingly leveraging UAS technology for intelligence gathering purposes, which enables them to exploit border security operations. Over the past 12 months, from April of 24 to April of 25, Texas DPS-owned sensors have identified 1,216 UAS border incursions. We know this is a fraction of the actual number of incidents, but alarmingly, nearly half of these are ranging in altitude between 600 and 1,800 feet above ground level. Typical altitude range for where our helicopters and Border Patrol helicopters operate. The increasing presence of U.S. operations in the same airspace of manned aviation introduces an alarming possibility of collisions, endangering the citizens of the state of Texas and law enforcement personnel and equipment. Such incidents critically impair border security operations and endanger lives, underscoring the urgent need for enhanced detection and mitigation systems. The interference with legitimate border security operations, UAS operations by these unauthorized drones undermines critical efforts to maintain control and effectively monitor the region. Taken together, these threats underscore the urgent need for Congress to grant authority to state and local law enforcement agencies to operate robust detection and mitigation strategies to counter the threat of drones and ensure the safety and security of the border regions. The existing 12 sensors owned by the Texas DPS are limited in scope and only detect DJI drones. This means they make up about 80% of the market, and the 12 sensors cover just 14% of the 1,200-mile stretch of Texas-Mexico border. This illustrates the urgent need to expand sensor coverage both in terms of geography and the variety that UAS can be detected. Addressing these threats requires comprehensive, layered approach. Detection technologies must be integrated to identify potential UAS threats promptly and accurately. While any mitigation strategies must be implemented with precision to minimize collateral damage, surgical mitigation techniques are essential to neutralize threats effectively without compromising public safety or causing unintended disruptions. Above all, we all understand that any counter-UAS detection, mitigation policy, or practice must abide by any applicable state or federal laws and align with the First and Fourth Amendments. Despite significant efforts at the state level, Texas DPS and other law enforcement Agencies face constraints imposed by the federal government that limit the scope of action needed to address the growing UAS threat. State and local and tribal territory law enforcement agencies need the ability to detect and mitigate criminal UAS along the border and near or over correctional facilities, prisons. On behalf of the Texas Department of Public Safety, we urge Congress to take action to address this issue. Thank you.
Ms. Daskal?
Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Durbin, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify today on an issue of critical importance, the safety and security of Americans from the potential misuse of drones. I will start with a standard disclaimer. I am a partner at Venable LLC and former Deputy Homeland Security Advisor, but I am testifying solely in my personal capacity, not on behalf of Venable, not on behalf of its clients, and not on behalf of the former administration. I will also start with the bottom line. Drones serve key public safety, recreational, and commercial functions, and it is absolutely essential that we do everything possible to support the domestic drone industry, including their ability to test and innovate. But as we've already heard, drones also can be weaponized by malicious actors and used carelessly in ways that interfere with lawfully present aircraft and put Americans at risk. We need congressional action to protect Americans from the potential misuse of drones. The bipartisan legislation introduced by Senators Gary Peters and Ron Johnson, including most recently as an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act of 2025, is, in my view, the place to start. Drone safety issues rose to prominence during the last 2 months of 2024 when there were numerous reports of drones flying over New Jersey. At the time, I was the Deputy Homeland Security Advisor. FBI, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Defense, and FAA officials surged resources in an attempt to determine what was happening and support local officials, subject to the limits of current authorities. They did not find any evidence of malicious activity, foreign involvement, or criminal action. Instead, it turns out that many of the reported drone sightings were aircraft and helicopters. Others were lawfully present drones. In early January 2025, the Trump administration reached a similar conclusion. As the president conveyed through his press secretary, quote, "The drones that were flying over New Jersey in large numbers were authorized. This was not the enemy," unquote. But at the time, the fear was palpable, and it was justified. The risk of drones being weaponized by malicious actors is real, and the federal government lacked sufficient authority and resources to address these threats. Just last week, on May 13th, the Department of Justice arrested a 19-year-old for planning to conduct a mass shooting at a Michigan military base on behalf of ISIS. On the day of the arrest, also the planned day of the attack, the 19-year-old had already launched a surveillance drone in support of the attack. One need only glance at the headlines regarding Ukraine and the Middle East to know how easy it is to purchase off-the-shelf drone technologies and equip them with deadly weapons. And even non-malicious uses of drones, including the careless flying of drones into protected airspace, pose significant risk to aviation security. Currently, just 4 federal agencies, the Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Defense, and Department of Energy, have authority to engage in advanced detection and mitigation measures to protect Americans from these risks. State, local, and tribal and territorial officials do not have authority to do so. To protect their communities from the misuse of drones, they are wholly dependent on limited federal support. In April 2022, the prior administration, in recognition of the current vulnerabilities, submitted to Congress a legislative proposal that would have expanded the authorities and set of actors who could respond to the misuse of drones. The key elements of that proposal are also included in the bipartisan legislation offered by Senator Peters and Senator Johnson, and that I urge Congress to support. The legislation would do 3 key things. First, it would expand the authority to detect and mitigate threats to airports, critical infrastructure, and public gatherings. Second, it would give state and local law enforcement officials, as well as airport and critical infrastructure owners, authority to engage in advanced detection measures, helping to ensure the early detection of threats. Third, it would create a limited pilot subject to oversight and review that would give trained state and local officials the authority to mitigate the threats that do emerge. This is a critical element of any effort to provide sufficient protection to the American people, given limited federal resources. The legislation also includes important safety protections and protections for civil rights and civil liberties. We were very lucky that the 2024 reported sightings in New Jersey turned out to be a false alarm, but next time we might not be so lucky, and I urge Congress to act. Thank you. I look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Ms. Daskal. Now, Mr. Douly.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sergeant Robert Douly, and I serve as the statewide UAS coordinator for the Florida Highway Patrol. I'm also a proud here to represent not only the state of Florida and the Florida Highway Patrol, but I also serve in other capacities as well. I'm an FAA safety team member, which is the educational arm of the FAA. We help and assist public safety agencies with UAS and education and training. I'm the director of public safety for AUVSI, the Association of Uncrewed Vehicle Systems International, for the Florida chapter. We started a group in Florida through drone responders, the Florida Public Safety Coordination Group, again, coordinating with our public safety professionals, both law enforcement and fire. And I also sit on the Aviation Committee for the IACP. Today, we're here to talk about the critical importance of drone detection and mitigation for public safety. As unmanned aircraft systems continue to proliferate across recreational, commercial, and other domains, the ability of public safety agencies to detect and mitigate unauthorized and threatening drones has become a national imperative. This statement outlines the growing threat and landscape associated with drones, discusses the current challenges in detecting and mitigation, and advocates for urgent integration of counter-UAS capabilities within a public safety framework. The rapid evolution and accessibility of drone technology has transformed industries and revolutionized emergency response and public safety operations. However, with this growth comes an increasing threat of misuse, whether intentional or through negligent. From contraband drops over prison yards to surveillance of critical infrastructure and interruptions of emergency scenes, public safety agencies now face a complex airspace risk. The ability to detect, track, identify, and, when necessary, mitigate rogue drones is essential for protecting lives and preserving critical infrastructure and ensuring operational integrity. Drones present a unique set of challenges to public safety. Criminal exploitation, as we saw in the video, whether they're doing smuggling drugs, weaponizing, or contraband into correctional facilities and across the border. I've physically been present at the Texas border. We've been serving out there for 2.5 years, and I've seen some of the things that the captain described. Terrorists used adversarial states and non-state actors who have experimented with drones for surveillance and weaponization, creating low-cost, low-detection threat vectors. In 2018 in Caracas, 2 drones were weaponized to go after, if memory serves, Maduro. Both were unsuccessful, but again, we could see how easy it was for them to do that. Privacy violations and harassment. Drones can be used to stalk, harass, or violate the privacy of civilians and law enforcement officers, often in ways that are difficult to detect and prevent. Interference with public safety operations, unauthorized drones flying near traffic crashes, fire scenes, which is what we saw in California with a drone strike on one of those airplanes, or disaster zones can impede emergency response, creating hazardous conditions for both responders and civilians. Most recently, we had a horrific car crash where we call it Trauma Hawk, which is the helicopter service that comes and transports patients, and they couldn't take off because there was a rogue drone hovering over the helicopter, and it created a huge hazard. The need for detection and mitigation capabilities, public safety agencies must be able to detect, identify, and if authorized, mitigate UAS threats in real time. Without the capacity, agencies operate blindly in shared airspace, increasing the risk to both responders and the public. Some of the benefits to these capabilities would be situational awareness, threat identification, incident mitigation, etc. The current limitations and legal barriers, despite the urgent need, most state, local, tribal, and territorial public safety agencies lack the legal authority to mitigate drones and often face limitations even detecting them. Only federal agencies currently possess this broad CUAS authority, leaving a gap in homeland security at the local level. Additionally, technology access, CUAS systems are costly, they're complex and often limited to military or federal use. Interagency coordination, the lack of real-time data sharing and standard operational procedures hinders unified responses when we are working with our federal partners and our state partners and our local partners, and policy gaps. Existing federal laws, including FAA preemption of airspace regulation, complicate the roles and responsibilities of our SLTT agencies. Moving forward, we're asking for legislative reform to grant limited controlled UAS authority by vetted and trained public safety entities under federal oversight and as proposed in legislation efforts before. Training and standardization, technology deployment, fund and deploy scalable non-kinetic drone detection systems to local agencies, particularly those responsible for critical infrastructure and mass events, and also encourage public and private collaboration where we collaborate with industry to figure out what technology would be appropriate to use and craft it towards specific public safety applications, and community engagement, which is probably one of the most important ones. Yeah. The conclusion, the ability to detect and mitigate road drones is no longer a futuristic concept. It is a present-day necessity. Public safety professionals stand on the front lines of both natural and man-made crisis, and their lack of CUAS capabilities leaves a critical vulnerability in our national preparedness. The federal agencies play a vital role empowering state and local responders with the tools, training, and authority to protect their communities from aerial threats is the next essential step in securing the homeland, and that is it. And I await your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Donohue.
Thank you. Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Durbin, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to today's hearing. UAS are part of our daily lives. They're used for agriculture, construction, sports broadcasting, film production, and myriad other peaceful purposes. They act as first responders. They're used for artistic expression. UAS also can be levied by states and non-state actors for nefarious purposes. They carry drugs, guns, bombs, flamethrowers, and CBNRW. They can be outfitted with tracking technologies enhanced by biometric identification. Autonomous swarms present further challenges. It's important that we have the authorities necessary to meet these threats, but what Congress passes cannot be a blank check. It needs to be carefully drafted to take account of constitutional rights. The law currently raises troubling First, Fourth, Fifth, and 10th Amendment concerns. On the First Amendment, courts have long considered video recording to fall within freedom of speech and the press. The right to obtain footage includes the right to record government employees in public space. That ability undergirds one of the primary First Amendment aims, which is to hold government officials accountable. That right is not absolute, but provisions which impact that right cannot, quote, burden substantially more speech than is necessary to further the government's legitimate interests, end quote. The statute on its face violates this test. There are no limits on the government facilities which are covered. There's no requirement for distance from the facility, the direction of travel, or whether the drone is over private property. There's no showing that must be made about specific targets. The provisions could be used to prevent media coverage on matters of great importance to the electorate. It has already occurred. The AG guidelines detailing covered facilities are similarly troubling. To determine whether activities constitute a credible threat, 7 possibilities are offered, some of which, such as the reasonable belief that UAS could harm a person or damage property, it's true of all drones. 6 of the 7 have no nexus to any facility or asset, and any interference in the execution of government activity counts, potentially including lawful protest. Further, to satisfy the requirement that the facility be connected to an authorized mission, the guidelines include any special national security event, which is defined as a designated event that by virtue of its political, economic, social, or religious significance may be the target of terrorism or other criminal activity. All of those are core First Amendment protected activities. The right to petition, moreover, applies to all 3 branches and promotes continual active political engagement. Courts use an experience and logic test to determine whether there is a qualified right of public access to public facilities. The law, however, allows the government to forbid access to all federal facilities and federally owned land without regard to its historical use. On the 4th and 5th Amendments, one of the most glaring concerns in the statutory language is that it essentially operates as a general warrant, which is forbidden under the 4th Amendment. A general warrant is a document issued by an official not based on any evidence of wrongdoing. It lacks particularity in the person or place to be searched or the papers or records to be seized. Unsupported by oath, it's used to find evidence of criminal activity. At the founding, such documents violated the reason of the common law and were thus unreasonable. The current law gives the government the authority to access all communications between the operator and the drone, to seize control of all UAS systems, and to search devices to find evidence of illegal activity. There's no oath, no third party, no probable cause. They act as a general warrant. RF drone detection systems share similarities here with geofence warrants in criminal law, which compel companies to provide location data from users' devices. They also lack particularity. But unlike the drone provisions, geofence warrants involve third-party magistrates, a demonstration of probable cause, and an oath. Even so, circuits are split as to whether they constitute general warrants. For the Fifth Circuit, they do. 124N suffers from the same constitutional defect. Finally, on states' rights, control of real property, including the airspace above land outside of federally owned property, falls in the purview of states. It's reserved to them through the 10th Amendment. There's nothing in the federal provisions which acknowledges state control over adjacent airspace, much less state rights to operate their own UAS over public property. These deficiencies can be addressed to assure the government has the power to protect against UAS while protecting constitutional rights. First, Congress could require a probable cause warrant to target specific drones under the protective measures subject to exigency exceptions as well as the border exception. Second, Congress should institute substantive First Amendment protections. And third, Congress should respect state rights by ensuring that states have the lead for drones under 400 feet and exempting state drones from federal targeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Now, Mr. Dixon.
Yes, first of all, Chairman Grassley and members, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak on this important issue today. Again, my name is Ricky Dixon. I'm the Secretary of the Florida Department of Corrections, and I currently serve as the President of the American Correctional Association. I'm here today representing several 100,000 correctional professionals across this nation who work tirelessly to maintain order, security, and provide rehabilitation within our facilities. I spent nearly 3 decades in this profession, starting as a correctional officer and working through the ranks to lead one of the largest prison systems in the United States. I tell you that to say that I know firsthand the urgent threats facing our staff, the inmates we house, and the public we serve. Now, I'm here today to sound the alarm and make you aware of a growing crisis within our profession, one that calls for immediate action. The criminal use of unmanned aircraft systems, or drones, is escalating, and we do not have the tools or the legal authority to stop them. These drones are no longer just a nuisance. They're sophisticated weapons for organized crime, smuggling fentanyl, heroin, razor blades, weapons, and contraband cell phones into our facilities with precision. Each time a drone enters our airspace, we're forced to lock down, halting education, job training, drug treatment, and mental health programs that reduce recidivism and prepare individuals for successful reintegration into society, programs you've appropriately supported and allocated funding for. The consequences, they're deadly. Drone-delivered narcotics have led to numerous overdose deaths inside our prisons throughout this nation and contributes significantly to violence against other inmates and our staff. But make no mistake, this crisis is not just a local issue. It does not end at our facility gates. Contraband cell phones smuggled in by drones are powerful criminal tools. From behind bars, inmates are orchestrating drug trafficking, intimidating witnesses, and directing violent crimes in our communities. Families are being extorted, forced to send money to protect loved ones from harm inside the prison walls. Inmates are being brutally assaulted to serve as examples of what can happen when families don't comply. American prisons are turning into command centers for drug cartels and gang leaders, driving crime well beyond our fences. It's only a matter of time before a firearm or firearms are dropped in by drones with timing synchronized with cell phones so that a specific inmate or group of inmates are in a position to receive them in an effort to take over a facility. All of this happens at a time when staffing shortages are already pushing our workforce to its limits. Officers are working mandatory overtime just to keep operations running. Adding drone-related lockdowns, heightened security demands, and emergency searches makes their jobs unsustainable. Yet, despite the severity of this issue, correctional agencies remain legally prohibited from taking action. Only 4 federal agencies have the authority to counteract drone threats. Meanwhile, state and local correctional facilities, among the most frequently targeted, remain defenseless. waiting for federal intervention is putting lives at risk. We appreciate legislative proposals for pilot programs to test counter-drone solutions, but let's be clear, pilot programs alone will not solve this national crisis. The issue requires a comprehensive, scalable, and well-regulated legal framework, one that grants correctional and law enforcement agencies the authority for advanced detection and mitigation, backed by funding, training, and oversight. Every authorized drone that enters correctional airspace undermines public safety. Every contraband cell phone delivered by drone strengthens criminal enterprises. And every lockdown caused by drone activity hinders rehabilitation and destabilizes institutions. We urge you to act, give us the tools, the authority, and the support we need to support this growing threat before it spirals further out of control, to stop this growing threat. The safety of our correctional facilities, our workforce, and our communities depend on it. Without this authority, we allow modern technology to become a weapon that undermines justice, facilitates contraband trafficking, and jeopardizes lives. Threats the framers never intended the First, Fourth, Fifth, or 10th Amendment to shield. I leave you with this. This issue will be addressed eventually, there's no doubt. The only question is whether we act now with foresight or wait for disaster and attempt to recover after the fact. Thank you, and I stand ready to take any questions.
In Finance Committee, so I hope somebody on my side of the aisle will take over while I'm gone. Captain Wilson, in your testimony, you mentioned an incident in which Texas state law enforcement drone was actually mitigated by a Mexican cartel members. Can you please elaborate on the challenge that you face from cartel drones and speak to the safety of the risk of your department faces by not being able to employ the same technology that cartels have started to use against U.S. law enforcement? Push your button.
That would help, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, that in 2019, they started the ground surveillance. They would follow us for an hour and a half, 2 hours back to our hotels from where we were working on the border. People are sitting in a tree or sitting on a fence line. All they're there for is to scout for us, for law enforcement, for federal, state, local law enforcement. UAS has increased significantly since then to now where they're, like I mentioned earlier, they're trying to crash drones into our drones. They're hovering over our helicopters at 1,600 feet, clearly in above 400 feet, and presenting a clear danger to any manned aviation in that area. In last month, we were mitigated by the cartels. We're in conversation or in communication with U.S. Border Patrol. They had asked us to see if we could. They had a detection over in Mexico, and were asked to see if we could find the pilot for that drone. After a little bit of time, we were able to locate that pilot and follow him. There was communication with Mexico to try to get the government there to respond. And as they were responding and before they got into the area, the criminal drone came down and departed the area. We continued to stay with the pilot and his co-pilot, if you will, to eventually our drone lost connection and was mitigated by the cartel, as we found out later, and crashed about 1,000 feet away from where the mitigation took place.
Thank you for that. Sergeant Douly, you and your office provide support for federal law enforcement at mass gatherings and during protective operations. I'd like to have you elaborate on your role providing this support and explain how enhanced counter-UAS authorities would better enable you to support federal partners?
Yeah, so that's a huge request we get. A lot of our federal and state partners know that we have the ability to do that. In most cases, our federal partners, their equipment is much more sophisticated than what we're allowed to use, but it is of still use. That's the number one question I get when they ask for our help, when we're using our equipment to help them in their detection, is can we mitigate? And of course, my response is no, we can't do that. They have a desperate need, I think, for a force multiplier and a support from the state. When we especially have our federal partners who rotate in and out from certain details and come to Florida, they're not the same people normally over and over again. So when they come down and they are not terribly familiar and we educate them on what our capabilities are and how we were supporting them already, again, over and over again, can you help us mitigate? No, we cannot. Our technology is passive. We use radars, cameras, remote ID, et cetera. We don't get into hacking and RF and all those things. But again, it still helps. It's just not on the level that they can perform those same duties. But it is a huge request that we get for those capabilities. And on top of that, I will get phone calls from our federal partners as well when they do have a request, because most of the requests that our federal partners get can't be fulfilled. They don't have enough resources and equipment, et cetera, to cover all the requests. And they'll call me, and again, I can't perform some of the same duties that they can, so in some cases it is of no use, because what they need specifically is the mitigation or the ability to detect on a higher level than what we're able to provide.
Mr. Dixon, in your testimony, you mentioned the dangers that drone-delivered contraband like weapons and cell phones present to prisons. Elaborate on the threat of contraband cell phones to prison security.
Sure, Mr. Chair. It's, cell phones and drones combined are a few of the most critical security threats we have right now. The irony in this is cell phones or drones deliver cell phones, and the very cell phones that are delivered are what is used to coordinate additional drone deliveries. Everything bad that happens in a prison usually starts with a conversation. So if we intercept or prevent the cell phones that are delivered by drones, we reduce a significant amount of the violence. As I mentioned in my testimony, cell phones are used to extort families, to maintain criminal networks on the street. As I mentioned, prisons in some cases are command centers for drug cartels because they continue their criminal enterprises. If we eliminate cell phones and drive the communication back to our state systems, we have sophisticated tools to monitor those systems, whether it be on our tablets or our institutional phone systems. But when they circumvent that through cell phones that drones deliver, it's one of the major issues we have to combat.
Thank you, Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Let me apologize for coming in late. I had another hearing in appropriations with Secretary Kennedy, and I'm sorry I missed the opening. Special thanks to Ms. Daskal and Professor Donohue, our witnesses that I was not here to introduce. Thanks, Senator Grassley, for doing that. So I'm sure most of us were watching the Cubs-Sox series in Wrigley Field this weekend, and I was struck by the fact that they were doting on the capacity they had with a drone to show images of Wrigley Field from angles and perspectives never known before. It was beautiful, and the Cubs won, so it was a good day all around. But it raised a question in my mind that I wanted to pose to several members of the panel here. If I were sitting in Wrigley Field with a friend or son or granddaughter, and I saw a drone overhead, I would want to be sure that it was a safe and friendly drone. I don't know that when I'm sitting there. Somebody has to find out, or at least ask the question. With over 1 million drones in our country today, and drones possibly hovering over fields of sports and other things, it raises a question of who's going to monitor that activity to make sure these are safe vehicles, air vehicles, that don't endanger anyone. At the same time, those drones could be gathering information, not so much at a ball field, but maybe even a wedding or someone's home. There's a privacy angle there too. Who's protecting the privacy of the people that they are broadcasting or gathering information on? So I'd like to ask Professor Donohue, how do you balance this? The drones over Wrigley Field, are they friendly or not? The gathering of information in my own backyard, is it anybody's business? Who's protecting me?
Thank you very much for the question. As a matter of large-scale outdoor events, for instance, most states have regulations and laws in place that prohibit the flight of drones over certain large-scale events. They require that there be agreement, some consent from the property owner or from the venue owner in order, or some sort of contract in place. In terms of how to balance those rights and the privacy, most states, they actually have carve-outs saying that others cannot fly drones over private property without the consent of the property owner themselves, because owing to this ancient doctrine of ad colum, property owners own the adjacent airspace over their land, and so they have the right to exclude drones.
But let's talk about the practical world.
Sure.
You've got air traffic controllers monitoring commercial aircraft, other aircraft. But in terms of monitoring actual drone activity, to the point of knowing whether it's complying with the state law, and if it's not, what to do about it, what's the answer there?
Anything below 400 feet is within the state domain. That is adjacent airspace.
How is it enforced?
Through state monitoring of this. There are agreements with the FAA, for instance, if you need to have a temporary flight restriction over particular areas, as during, for instance, the Super Bowl. In those cases, the way to balance the civil liberties concerns is to make sure that there are restrictions. For instance, you don't extend the Super Bowl coverage for a month, and you don't extend it over any land or any drone anywhere in the country, but it has to be a drone that's actually adjacent to that particular site. So when the federal government is involved, if there's the potential for the federal government to take down a drone or to interfere in its operation or to conduct a search of the device itself, then there needs to be some nexus to the actual open air facility or the place that's trying to be protected.
Professor Donohue, if counter-drone authorities are not drafted carefully, could they permit government authorities to intercept data or communications in violation of the Fourth Amendment?
Yes.
Thank you for that. Mr. Chairman?
Senator Lee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to each of you for being here. Over the last 15 years or so, drones have become increasingly a part of our lives. They've been used not only by the military, by law enforcement, by immigration authorities, but also by businesses, hobbyists, and other kinds of enthusiasts. Yet, in some instances, drones can present threats, grave threats, pretty dire threats. Meanwhile, the current regulatory framework creates a problem insofar as it inhibits state and local law enforcement from adequately addressing those same threats that can be uniquely posed by drones. That's why I introduced a bill called the Shield You Act, Stopping Harmful Incidents to Enforce Lawful Drone Use. And this legislation, once enacted, will help state and local law enforcement by giving them authority on a limited, constrained basis that they need in order to protect their citizens and their communities from those who would use drone technology to harm the public. Sergeant Douly, let's start with you. Now, you've testified about the limitations imposed by federal law that effectively prohibit state and local law enfortement, in fact, they expressly prohibit them from effectively utilizing counter-drone, counter-UAS systems. This bill that I refer to, the Shield You Act, lifts some of those restrictions. How would passing that bill and granting limited counter-UAS capabilities enhance state and local law enforcement and your ability to protect the public?
Well, number one, I agree with almost everything that was said earlier is we do need some significant oversight. We need accountability. We need training. We need all these things. Like someone like me shouldn't exist where I had to figure it out on my own because there was
Well, you should exist.
Well, but you understand what I'm getting at. There should be some type of oversight, guidance, and training where we could establish that. And then when this was rolled out, it would be controlled. Like, you know, how would you mitigate something? Okay, why would you even set up a system in the first place in a particular location? Justify it. Why are you here? What are you going to do if you saw a drone in the airspace? Are you just detecting it that it's there and it's minding its own business, or is it a threat? Why did you do what you did? But the bill would dramatically increase our ability to keep critical infrastructure, VIPs, other mass like sporting events a lot safer, and people like to the other senator's point, when you see a drone flying over the Cubs game, is it a friend or foe? And that's what we would like to do. Not necessarily interfering and, again, regulating what exactly is being detected. Remote ID, for example, it's not great. It's hard to detect at times because every drone broadcasts it slightly differently. But if you were doing standard RF detection or something of that nature where it's only picking up what type of drone it is and serial number, it's not telling you anything about the operator or the person operating it, nothing personal, right? We still have to go and follow the legal process to get that information. I think it would be of great use and of great help to public safety if used in the proper way.
That's a great point. I like the way you phrased it. I mean, it reminds me of an analogy Robin Williams once referred to the unarmed English Bobby, who, being unarmed, upon seeing the commission of a crime, yells, "Stop," or "I'll yell, stop again." But if you can't do more than that, there are going to be problems, and that's something we face with drones. Captain Wilson, let's go to you next now. You've highlighted the need for counter-UAS capabilities at and near the border. If state and local law enforcement capabilities were unleashed in the counter-UAS sphere, how would law enforcement efforts at the border be improved corresponding to that, or as a result of that, I should say?
It would allow us, law enforcement at all levels, to work closer together, to have, again, identify those locations that we wish to have a sensor, and based on activity or that's going on, and it'd keep us and the community safer, being able to detect, yes, sir, and detect, and then, if necessary, mitigate.
Secretary Dixon, when drones are detected overhead prison, a correctional facility, what are the security protocols that you go through once you see it?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. It's quite extensive. We lock the compound down. That can be for hours, days, weeks, in some cases, depending on the payload, the portion of the payload we discovered, if at all. Significant consequences occur between gangs and different members and different inmates in the institution if the payload doesn't make it to its intended target. So it's a dangerous situation. As I mentioned earlier,
there's no way that doesn't compromise your ability to operate correctional facilities in a manner that is effective and safe.
It absolutely does. In addition to, as I mentioned earlier, stop all the rehabilitative programming, the mental health programming, all those functions that we're supposed to carry out, we put on pause at a time we're already in a difficult staffing situation. I do want to, in appreciation for Senator Durbin's comment earlier as well, I do think there's a differentiation to be made between our environment in the prison setting versus the citizenry. When it comes to the Fourth Amendment, there's no reasonable expectation of privacy for those people we house there, and so we're simply asking for that when drones enter our airspace to be able to deal with them and mitigate the threat at that point.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. This has been really interesting testimony. I think there's over 1 million drones registered with the FAA. They can be used for some really good stuff. Farmers in Minnesota are using them for farm management, civil engineers for surveying. I especially see this in rural areas when we have everything from train wrecks on. They're incredibly helpful. We also know the risks. You just brought up this, Mr. Dixon, at the Correctional Institute, and I hadn't thought through all that. Thank you. We know that there's privacy concerns, and our liberties, which Senator Durbin, I know, discussed. I just want to start with something that's on my mind a lot, Ms. Daskal, and that is commercial aviation. As you noted in your written testimony, drones accounted for nearly 2/3 of near misses with commercial passenger planes, which is kind of an extraordinary number. You also noted that airports lack critical authority to protect against drone incursions. We saw what happened in LA with the firefighting plane at a time of just critical danger. What authority should Congress provide airports and other critical infrastructure operators to ensure they're able to protect the public?
Thank you, Senator. I share the concerns, particularly the concerns around airports and critical infrastructure. And as I said in my testimony, I think that the legislation, the bipartisan legislation that was introduced by Senator Peters and Senator Johnson is a really good place to start, and it does a couple of things. First, it gives airport owners and critical infrastructure owners new authority to engage in advanced detection measures, which they don't currently have, to be able to identify the threats that do arise. That is important. It's also subject to training requirements, to privacy compliance requirements, to the use of technologies that are tested and approved. And secondly, the other piece of this that I also think is critical is ensuring that state, local authorities have the ability to mitigate as appropriate, subject to oversight and review.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm a co-sponsor of that bill, and we hope we can move that. News organizations, you know how we have to protect their right to be able to take photos and the like of disasters, so the public knows that. Could you talk about balancing the uses that news organizations have for drones so that they don't interfere with public safety quickly?
Yes, absolutely. So as you know, Senator, the FAA has the authority to put in place temporary flight restrictions for a range of reasons, including safety and security reasons. There is also a process by which media organizations can seek waivers in the event that there are temporary flight restrictions in order to engage in First Amendment protected activity and to ensure that the public is made aware of critical information, and those waivers, that process needs to continue.
Okay, thank you. Sergeant Douly, in your testimony, written testimony, you suggested granting state and local law enforcement limited counter-UAS authorities subject to standardized training and certification. There are examples of this across law enforcement. For example, all bomb technicians across the country are trained at the FBI's Hazardous Device School. How would you envision this standardized training?
Number one, it would have to come from, I think, one of our federal partners that's already been authorized to do this and has been doing it. They would have the most experience. Number two, I don't think that everybody necessarily would need this right off the bat. I think there should be some level of credentialing as to different levels of detection and mitigation as well. You may have like a multi-tiered approach of someone that just can simply detect and do nothing about it because whatever reason, and then you go down the list, and then you may have more critical infrastructure or maybe a higher profile target area that may need those additional permissions. I think that you should have, like, for example, like just to be a drone pilot, I have to get a Part 107 airman certificate, right? I have to register my drone. There's a process in place. When I wanted to drive a car, I had to go take a driving test. Like, there's tests for everything. I wanted to be a trooper. I had to go to school.
I got it.
Yeah, so this is no different. I think we could figure it out to where there would be different levels.
Got it.
I think one of the four should definitely be the starting point.
Okay, thank you. My last question, Mr. Dixon, you talked about things being smuggled in through drones into prisons. You also noted that correctional facilities are legally prohibited from employing counter-UAS technology. Could you talk about the threat to correctional officers and inmates at a facility?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Absolutely. Anytime drugs are introduced to the compound and the kind of contraband that comes in, it increases the threat. In terms of, I've seen a 98% increase in outside medical trips or security in the last several years, much of that related to the contraband drones bring in. It's one of the most dangerous things we do is take inmates outside of our fence to local hospitals. The violence that's associated with the drugs coming in, the contraband coming in, has increased exponentially since this became a problem.
Mm-hmm. And last, just when the drones breach the perimeter, it is obviously a major threat, but what type of counter-UAS authorities do correctional facilities need? And make it quick because I've gone over my time.
We need, and we're not resistant at all to oversight and training, but we need the ability to mitigate that threat to a greater extent than we do now to intercept those drones coming over our facility.
Thank you.
Senator Brett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing today on this important topic. I hear this from people all across Alabama. The lack of drone mitigation authority for state and local law enforcement has become a critical issue. We see it specifically when we're looking at large public gatherings, which includes large sporting events, which my state takes great pride in. And we want to make sure that public safety comes first. Even when it comes to federal installations in Alabama, it's often state and local law enforcement and personnel who are the closest and most capable of actually responding. We see this too. Our Alabama law enforcement agency, who is headed by Secretary Hal Taylor, who does a tremendous job. They assist federal partners and are likely the first ones to be able to respond and to do it in a meaningfully and efficient way. But without proper authority, they can't act with the speed and coordination that they need that matters most in a time of a crisis. So I'm going to address this question to Captain Wilson and Sergeant Douly to start with. Is there a legislative solution that is as simple as just extending existing mitigation authorities to state and local law enforcement that would actually help in these situations? Or is there other gaps in the law that needs to be considered? And what should our top priorities be when considering a legislative solution to actually address this issue?
We looked in it extensively, especially when we started working with our federal partners. Those permissions were granted by Congress, right? So they can't be delegated. Like, for example, some TFO programs, temporary federal officer programs, where the U.S. Marshals will deputize local law enforcement with certain abilities to do U.S. Marshals things. We looked into that, and again, we feel that the authority couldn't be delegated. Like, that would have been the simplest approach. Deputize me as whatever,
right.
And under your supervision or guidance, we would move forward and do this, but we don't think that's correct. So I don't know what we would do as a simple solution, other than we're in this room here trying to figure it out. But we've tried to look down some of those legal avenues of doing it correctly, but that was what we came up with, and they can't delegate those authorities if they were to bless us as a TFO.
Again, like Sergeant Douly said earlier, that there has to be training, there has to be some accountability, there has to be transparency for all the agencies that start, and you're going to have to start somewhere with some credentialing of some law enforcement agencies at the appropriate level.
So are those things that we could be doing right now? What are things that we could be doing right now to make sure that we're preparing for that we're taking proactive steps to be able to allow state and local law enforcement to have this capacity or this ability in the future?
So I think that right now you should probably establish like who would run this from a federal level. That would, once we get started with that, then we start figuring out how we should roll this out, who should be a part of the initial rollout, and what type of equipment we should be using, and more importantly, some type of process in place of standardizing how this is used, a reporting process in place, et cetera, to where if I do deploy something and we do detect and we do mitigate or whatever it is, that there is proper, like we talked about multiple times, of accountability. So if I'm right, everything's fine, I submit a report. If I did something wrong, we can identify it and either correct it or discipline or whatever the case is. There has to be right or wrong. We have to have transparency to do that. But I think we should identify a federal entity of some sort that should control this, moving out towards public safety.
And is the training in place now to be able to make these moves?
No, ma'am.
No.
So we would need to be able to invest in that as well?
Yes.
Okay. I want to turn to you, Secretary Dixon, in my last few minutes. In Alabama, like most other states, we have seen an increase in drones using to fly contraband into correctional facilities. As you have testified today and spoken with my colleagues about, that presents a real risk, not only to inmates, but obviously the officers as well. Based on your experience, can you kind of explain to us some of the unique challenges related to drone mitigation when it comes to to a correctional setting, and how those should inform us as we're looking at potential legislation?
Thank you, Senator. One of the most significant challenges is they come in and we don't know they're there. Often they fly, sometimes they fly high, they're fast, they're swift. So often the contraband is delivered and we never saw it coming, so we're defenseless. We have limited systems that help detect when they're coming in, but not nearly as advanced as they should be and as the technology is capable to deliver right now if we had the federal authorities we need. And I would just like to add, not to be melodramatic, but I would encourage us to act with the same sense of urgency that we would if we were watching on the news right now that multiple automatic weapons were just delivered into one of our compounds by drone and to gang members, and they escaped or harmed or killed other inmates or staff, because that is a very likely scenario. That's not being an alarmist, it's very likely. And I'm not implying we're not, it's why we're here today, and we're so thankful that we're having this discussion.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Moody.
Well, thank you. It's not too often I get to go behind my fellow junior senator. That's right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and for all of the witnesses for taking time away from your jobs and your families to be here in Washington, especially to my fellow Floridians. Very proud of you. Thank you for being here and representing the great free state of Florida. I think something that resonated, Mr. Dixon, what you said was act with a sense of urgency. Something that we in Congress don't take to heart a lot around here. As a mother, I certainly do, because I know what we do right now in this Congress will protect or leave vulnerable many Americans and certainly our children. In Florida, we are home to many military installations. Certainly, we have 3 combatant commands in our state. The sensitivity of what is taking place within the state of Florida, not only on military bases, also on our Space Coast. Most of our launches are done from Kennedy Space Center. So we have a lot of sensitive personnel, information, movements, commands right in the heart of Florida. And I know that Sergeant Douly with FHP, you are coordinating the UAV program there, and you assist when there are incursions in military space and violations, and use state assets to help with that. I want to thank you for being an expert and for your attention on that. One of the things that I have been trying to highlight and have passed legislation to do is to stop visas right now, student visas particularly, from the Chinese government, because they have laws in place right now that require their citizens to gather intelligence and work with the CCP, and yet we're importing 300,000 a year into the United States. And particularly, I want to point out an example. In August of 2021, we allowed in to study one of these students to study at the University of Minnesota, and particularly thereafter, we're told that he was gathering information from military bases. On January 18th of 2024, the FBI arrested him in San Francisco for operating an unarmed aircraft system in violation of national defense airspace and photographing defense installations. A further investigation found that he had taken photographs and used a drone to photograph the naval base in Norfolk, Virginia. Here on a visa to study at the university. Thankfully, he was finally deported just a couple of weeks ago and sent home. Thankfully, we have an administration that's taken these things seriously now, but this is a weakness, I believe, in our Espionage Act, in the sense that we outlaw photographing military bases using drones. In fact, in this particular case, they found video on this drone, but they could only charge the photographs. It's a weakness in the evolution of technology that we have failed to update our laws. And so I would ask you, Sergeant, is this something that you believe we need to shore up to make sure we can criminally charge, when we don't just have foreign agents taking photographs of sensitive military bases and installations, but also video?
Yes, no, I totally agree. And we also have some pretty robust statutes in Florida that also allow law enforcement or public safety to have at least a little bit more teeth in the bite when we do have some type of these situations. Florida Statute 330.41 and 934.50, which also protect people's rights to privacy with drone operations, et cetera. So I completely agree that we should figure something out and make it to where these things can't happen.
And Mr.
Senator, may I possibly add?
One moment. I just want to say, Mr. Chairman, today I'm going to introduce the Drone Espionage Act legislation, which would include, it would strengthen the Espionage Act of 1917 and include videography of sensitive national defense sites as a crime, include videography in addition to photographs. This is an issue that doesn't just affect Florida. All of the members here have sensitive military sites in their states. Many congressional members have states where folks have come over here on visas, foreign nationals have been caught videoing sensitive military sites in this country, and we have to put an end to it. It has to be a crime. And I appreciate the time, and I'm sorry I have run out of time, and I will leave to the chairman whether or not he wants to permit additional testimony.
Is there any comment from any of you on our last point?
Yes, please. I just wanted to comment on the last point. I also build drones and I work on national security issues. So thermal imaging, lasers like LiDAR, the use of other imaging and sensor technologies, it is a gap, in my view, in the Espionage Act, and it is something that needs to be addressed. I also just wanted to add the border exception here because obviously along the border, case law is very strong in showing that there's an exception to warrant requirements along the border because of national interests within at least 20 miles of the border if it's contiguous with entering and leaving the United States. So, and then the third point is the military sites are precisely the kind of sensitive facility that should be subject to these types of provisions. But that's very different from, you know, every public library, right, or every other federal facility across the board, which is why that tailoring actually would matter for Fourth Amendment purposes, with exceptions built in for certain sites as well as along the border itself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would note that a couple of witnesses has brought up some of the potential First Amendment concerns related to drones and monitoring activities. And Ms. Daskal mentioned specifically that she wanted to make sure she was ensuring people could engage in First Amendment protected activity. And it's this sort of line of question I'd like to pursue with you. Did you, in your time at DHS, co-chair the Biden administration's Disinformation Governance Board?
No, I was not the co-chair of the governance.
Did you write the charter?
In my time at DHS, at the time, I was the acting general counsel at DHS.
Well, I have a memo here from you with a couple things that we're going to get into, but you wrote the charter, correct?
I was, as I said, Senator, I was in a general counsel role, and in that role, everything came through.
Did you have a role in picking Nina Jankowicz to be the executive director of the Disinformation Governance Board?
I was not the hiring authority.
Did you have input before she became Mary Poppins? Were you aware that she was going to become the executive director of the Disinformation Governance Board?
I was aware, yes.
Okay. Did you support that?
I am not going to get into internal conversations.
Okay, well, we'll get into, how about some public documents here? Let's just get into the memo that you authored. On January 31st, 2022, you authored a memo to Secretary Mayorkas asking him to sign off on the charter that you authored. In that charter, there's a few things that you were trying to address, to dispel as relates to misinformation or disinformation relating to the origins and effects of COVID-19. Is your position that it would have been appropriate for the government to work with social media companies to censor points of view that maybe COVID-19 originated in China?
Senator, it's my view that it's not appropriate for the government to censor any points of view.
Literally, you were a part of the Disinformation Governance Board of the United States of America. My contention is the Orwellian name of Ministry of Truth was already taken, so the Disinformation Governance Board slid right in, and you were a big part of this. I mean, you wrote the charter. You'd also wanted to censor views and dispel disinformation about the efficacy of masks. Another conspiracy theory that the government thought it was their job to dispel. And so I find it kind of rich that you're here expressing concerns about First Amendment concerns about anything. A federal district court judge said this was the biggest affront to the First Amendment in the history of the United States of America, this censorship enterprise that the Biden administration engaged in that you were a big part of. I want to ask you also about, in that memo that you wrote, attached to the charter, there is a proposed time schedule with Twitter. For April 28th, 2022, you were going to meet with Twitter executives, including Yoel Roth, who by the head of site integrity, to discuss. It's noted that Nick and Yoel both know the Disinformation Governance Board director, Nina Jankowicz, and the purpose of it was for them to become more involved with the Disinformation Governance Board analytic. Were you at that meeting?
I do not recall that meeting.
You don't recall? Well, it turns out that Twitter actually became very involved in your efforts, didn't they?
I was not engaged with Twitter on these efforts.
Okay. Well, they were engaged in helping dispel the Hunter Biden laptop as quote unquote a hack and leak, Russian hack and leak operation, which was cited, by the way, in the charter of things to address. COVID-19 conspiracy theories. I just think they don't have a lot of time, and we could do a whole hearing on this. But as Missouri's Attorney General, I happen to bring the lawsuit Missouri versus Biden, which is why I'm so familiar with your efforts. And I think that we would be remiss to not at every point out the people who were involved in this, who would trample individual rights in this country, their ability to speak their mind because they thought the government should decide what the truth was. And this country was founded on the principle that that's not the case, that individuals can make up their own minds. So hopefully we never go down this road again. But you ought to be ashamed of yourself for your role in this.
Thank you, Senator Schmidt. Senator Corden.
So this topic caused the events of July the 13th, 2024 to come to mind. The attempted assassination of President Trump, where the shooter used a drone in advance of the event to surveil the location of this program and or this rally, and in a place that was supposed to be among the most protected in America, where temporary flight restrictions were in place. The Secret Service apparently didn't have adequate anti-drone technology or the know-how to actually stop these drones. So to me, that just demonstrates that nowhere is safe. And Mr. Dixon, you made that point several times. I want to ask Captain Wilson. Captain Wilson, thank you for your service to our state over many years. Obviously, this is a big challenge at the Texas-Mexico border. And of course, the Department of Public Safety, you're a Texas Ranger, former DPS officer. DPS has had a lot of experience dealing with border security matters for over many years. But can you give us a sense of the volume or the number of drone encounters that are seen at the border these days? Is this an occasional occurrence? Is it a daily occurrence? Is it an hourly occurrence? How frequent are the drone incursions?
Thank you, Senator. It depends on the location.
Right.
And in a 12-month period, there were a little over 1,200 drone incursions across the border that we detected on our sensors.
That you knew of?
That we knew of, and that's an important point to make note of, is that we knew of, and it's just our sensors, we're not combining all of U.S. Border Patrol, DEA, or anybody else's sensors where we can have a common operating picture of what's going on down there on the border.
Would that be helpful?
It would absolutely be helpful. El Paso, UTEP has a system out there that is very robust and very layered, and it will actually scare you if you look at what flights are crossing the border.
It strikes me as bizarre that after all these years, with all the attention being given to the border, both in the failures of the previous administration's policies to deal with border security matters, and then now that we still lack the capability to just know what all is coming across the borders. And I think that's a matter of urgent need for the Congress to address. This is, after all, an international border, and it's fundamentally the federal government's responsibility. I understand the state of Texas, under Governor Abbott, had to step up in the absence of federal government law enforcement to try to fill the gap, but it's still a huge challenge. Every time have been to the border, and I've been there many times and welcomed many of my colleagues down there so they could learn, and as I have, from the people who are on the ground there. I've always been told by Border Patrol that border security is really a combination of three things. It's infrastructure, it's boots on the ground, and it's technology. But I take it from your testimony that the technology still isn't capable of filling this particular gap.
Yes, sir.
And if you go along the Rio Grande River, if you ride in one of the river boats that the Department of Homeland Security has or the DPS has, you'll see a number of scouts by the cartels and the coyotes directing the movement of immigrants across the border where they see an opening or an opportunity. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And so these drones provide an enhanced ability to defeat the efforts by the federal, state, and local law enforcement to secure the border.
Yes, sir.
So let's talk briefly about the scourge of fentanyl. Fentanyl has taken tens of thousands of lives in America. It showed up in every community throughout the country. And the unfortunate characteristic of fentanyl is it's easy to make from chemical precursors, and it's relatively compact and easy to transport. But do drones currently transport fentanyl across the border?
I'm not personally aware of any, but I'm sure there are. And I know that there's been those instances where drugs and other things have been flown across.
These drones are capable of carrying a significant payload, right?
Yes, sir.
Of whatever is put on the drone. And to your knowledge, are the transportation of the fentanyl across the border confined to the ports of entry, or do they also include the space between the ports of entry?
And we're past time, but I'll let you finish that question.
Between the ports of entry, yes, sir.
And not between?
No, between the ports. Between the ports of entry. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Well, there's this strange myth out there that the movement of drugs is just across the ports of entry and not between the ports of entry. But that's not your experience, is it?
No, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Kennedy?
The bad guys are using drones. Does anybody disagree with that? Okay. And the federal government has the authority to fight back, does it not? But state, nobody disagrees with that statement? Sure, Professor.
I would say within limits, yes. Within constitutional limits.
Okay. Do any of you disagree with giving state and local law enforcement the authority to fight back?
Again, within constitutional limits.
Okay. Tell me what your constitutional concerns are, Professor.
So I have three primary concerns. The first has to do with the Fourth Amendment and the conditions under which a warrant is required and a general warrant is forbidden by the Fourth Amendment. So in this particular case, it's important.
Professor, before you give me one of your lectures, are you saying that we should require state and local law enforcement to get a warrant before they fight back?
It depends on the condition. So in an exigent circumstance or something along the border.
I'm aware of the exceptions to the warrant requirement. But you, generally speaking, you want to require them to get a warrant.
Only for the search of a device or the seizure of property. There are also due process implications of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You started to mention another one of your objections.
First Amendment.
First Amendment. Okay. Any others?
Yeah, I also have a state rights, a 10th Amendment concern here, which is that states own the airspace adjacent to the land within their state that's not federally owned, and the current federal provisions don't recognize state sovereignty in that way.
So you want to give state and local law enforcement the authority to fight back, but you want to list a whole lot of conditions. Is that a fair assessment?
Not a whole lot, but some. There needs to be a nexus to the facility. It can't be any drone anywhere in America if you're concerned about a particular facility, but right now it's too broad. There have to be acknowledgments of First Amendment concerns. So for instance, limiting the covered facilities to the experience and logic test with which the courts use for right of public access, or prohibiting media bans across the board, or setting a time limit before and after special events so they don't extend extensively. This is what a number of state measures already do, and I'd like to see that at a federal level and apply to bring this within the constitutional limits.
Sounds like a lot of conditions to me.
No, not very many. As long as there's probable cause and the conditions are met, then absolutely you can.
Have you ever heard of a legislative practice called loving a bill to death?
Yes.
Okay. And that's when you take a bill and somebody says, I'm really for this bill. But then they add so many amendments and they screw it up so badly that the bill either becomes ineffective or doesn't pass. Is that a pretty accurate description?
Of the term?
Yeah.
Yes.
You're trying to love this to death, aren't you?
I disagree.
You're not really for giving law enforcement the power to fight back, are you?
I am in favor of giving law enforcement that power and respecting constitutional limits.
I don't believe you, Professor. Okay? You're not talking to Bambi's baby brother here. Okay, I've read some of your stuff. I think you'd be more intellectually honest if you just come out and say, I'm on the side of the bad guys here. I think we shouldn't give state and local law enforcement the authority to fight back. You're trying to make it as hard as possible, aren't you?
We'll have to disagree on that point, Senator.
No. You ever heard the expression, watch what they do, not what they say? I've watched what you've done. I know what you believe. Or you're on the FISA court?
I'm not on the court. No, I'm an amicus for the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court and the Court of Review.
Okay. Were you there when you guys issued all those bad warrants against Trump's people?
I can't discuss my work on the court, unfortunately.
Oh, it's top secret, right? You'd have to put me on the American people on double secret probation if you told them the truth, wouldn't you?
No. I can't discuss my matters that I've handled before the court. I can discuss the public ones where I've dealt with First Amendment concerns and the right to petition. I did an extensive history looking at that right
I'm done,
to petition.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Kennedy. We're going to turn it over to Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Madam Chair. When there are sightings or reports of drones, the ones who respond are often the local and state police, law enforcement, as you know. And very often DHS or the Department of Justice take a lot longer to respond, and the ones on the line, as we've seen recently in Connecticut, reports, sightings, many of them. And they often lack the resources really to provide adequate answers. Shouldn't we be providing more authority and resources to local and state law enforcement? The FAA right now is strained as it is. I don't need to tell anyone in this room, can barely provide for air safety. In fact, as we've seen, is losing the skilled workforce that it needs to protect safety in the skies. Shouldn't we be giving more authority to local and state law enforcement along with the resources to do a better job? Let me ask all of you that question. And maybe be more specific about what specific equipment should be provided, how it should be provided,
Again, that's a question that, again, some of our federal partners that are allowed to do this, they've been doing it longer, they've had more capabilities than us. Again, like my earlier statement, I think that it should be training, number one, rules and regulations. Someone should not only be fluent with how the technology works, but also FAA rules and regulations, privacy concerns, et cetera, so that when they make that decision to not only detect but mitigate, it's done correctly or as correctly as a human being can make that decision. But I think that that's how you move forward, and yes, they should have the ability, but it should be under certain guidelines and restrictions that they need certain levels of training, certification, education, et cetera, to make sure that when they do detect something, they're making the right decision based on a multitude of different things to either mitigate it or shoo it away. It should be done in that way.
I agree as well, Senator. I think it is also important that state and local authorities, as well as airport owners and critical infrastructure owners, are given the authority to engage in advanced detection measures, which they currently do not have, so that there is a common understanding and awareness of threats before it becomes too late. There also should be an expansion of authority to trained state and local authorities subject to oversight, subject to protections for civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy that would allow trained state and local authorities to engage in appropriate mitigation measures. And finally, there needs to be as well the ability for our domestic drone industry to test and innovate and be able to do the kind of testing to ensure that the federal government and state and locals have the best technology to engage in, ideally, the kind of disruptions that don't require kinetic action as well.
Are you concerned about how robust the domestic drone industry is?
I think it is important to support the domestic drone industry, and I also think it's important to ensure that as entities within the domestic drone industry are seeking the opportunity to engage in the testing, that is facilitated so that the drone industry is a step ahead of the adversaries.
The overwhelming number of drones used in this country are made abroad, correct?
Yes, that is a concern.
In China?
That is a concern, sir.
What is the percentage? You may have already testified to it. I apologize for repeating.
If I may, 80% of the drones are DJI, which is a Chinese-owned company.
80%. And what can be done to increase the number made in this country and perhaps restrict the number made in China? Mr. Wilson.
Yes, sir, Senator. I'm going to echo what my partner here has said already. Increase the funding for American drone manufacturers to be competitive in technology and price. They can do it. They just haven't.
With increased funding?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you all for being here. And I think to each of us, when you look at DJI, their numbers are of tremendous concern for us. That's why some of us have had provisions that remove the ability of our military to use DJI drones, and also for local law enforcement from them using DJI drones. Any of these drones that are manufactured by adversaries or in these adversarial situations are a safety risk to us because of the transmission of that data, and then who holds that data and where they hold that data. So as we continue to push back on utilization of foreign manufactured drones, it gives openings for the domestic industry to increase their presence. And we hope, Mr. Wilson, in answer to, or in addition to what you were saying, we hope that this helps to motivate domestic manufacturing of these drones. We do know there are some supply chain issues around that. And as we look at tariffs and trade, we are seeking to address some of those issues. I represent Tennessee. We have a lot of outdoor events in Tennessee. We've got Titans football that people enjoy. We've got the Bonnaroo Music Festival and so many festivals around our state. I've recently done the Fish Fry and the Strawberry Fest and a couple of others in our beautiful state. But one of the things people are concerned about is when they do hear that drone flying overhead, because they don't know who put it there and why they put it there, and if this is an infringement on their privacy, or if they are being spied upon, or and the first person they turn to is going to be local law enforcement. And I agree with some of you and disagree with Professor Donohue. I think it's an imperative that we give local and state law enforcement the ability to participate in this policing and the mitigation efforts that need to take place. I would like, and Sergeant Douly, let me come to you on this. Let's break this down and look at what kind of partner the FBI and the FAA have been for state and local law enforcement. As you look at these mitigation efforts, what kind of partner are they when it comes to these counter-UAS efforts, and where could that relationship be strengthened?
Number one, the relationship, the stakeholder relationship we have with both of those entities is pretty strong. The FAA is super supportive. Unfortunately, they can't grant those permissions to do those things. Even some of the data that some of our federal partners at times collect, they're worried about like how it was collected, et cetera. But it can be strengthened by, again, just starting the process of establishing one of those federal entities as the lead to help guide people forward. And then from there, I think it'll just blossom and organically grow into something much stronger where there is regulation. Now we have a pathway forward. Now people can start learning how to do this. And again, I'm a strong believer that you shouldn't just understand the technology itself. You should have a firm grasp on everything that goes into it, including FAA rules and regulations, et cetera, so that when you have one of those events in Tennessee, if someone had a legal right to be there, fair and equitable access to that airspace, they're up, they have the proper permissions or whatever the case is, and they're just documenting or taking photos or whatever it is. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't know that that's something benign versus something that's bad.
So basically a pre-clearance
Yes.
to be in that space.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that. I want to move on to something. Mr. Dixon had talked about this earlier, and Sergeant Douly, I'll stay with you. We've had 2 instances in Tennessee where a criminal attempted to use an armed drone to murder someone. And in one case, there was somebody that was planning an attack on the Knoxville FBI field office, and in another, a man attempted to attack an electronic substation with homemade drones. So we know that this takes place, and Mr. Dixon talked about it with law enforcement and prisons and jails. So it just leads me to believe that there has got to be some reforms on how we look at the regulations around the drones. And I know I am over time. Madam Chairman, if I may take a moment, and Sergeant Douly, let me have you talk a bit how we do these reforms before there is a successful attack that is carried out. From how would we go about those reforms so we're in front of any type of attack that takes place?
Again, we have 3 handsome public safety professionals. We have our senators here, decision makers, and we have some legal experts. I mean, there's a pathway forward. It can be quick, it can be done correctly, but again, I'm a firm believer that we have to establish someone who's the lead. And then from there, I think that we can move forward to get it done pretty quickly. And then, of course, all of our states represented here, Florida and Texas, we would obviously step up to whatever level we would need to make it happen in a timely fashion.
Secretary Dixon, anything to add on that?
I agree. The frustrating thing is the technology exists. That's not our problem. It's the authority we need. So that's good news and bad news. The technology is there to do everything we need to do. I would distinguish ourselves a little independently in the corrections industry because we are a fixed site and we have a different population. So I don't think there's any reason we can't work together to move ahead on authorities we need to combat this immediately.
So the federal, state, and local partnership. We need to work through that.
Yes, the partnership is great. We need the congressional, we need language authority from the federal level to allow us to utilize the tools.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. And thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. I know this was a long hearing, but I appreciate your attention and participation throughout. Written questions can be submitted by senators for the record until May 27th at 5 p.m., and then we'll ask the witnesses to respond and return the questions to the committee as quickly as possible. With that, you are free to go and enjoy lunch. The hearing is adjourned.